Everywhere you look, the numbers are staggering. The United States owes tens of trillions. Europe carries trillions more. Japan's tab is nearly as large as its entire economy. Even oil giants and export powerhouses, Saudi Arabia, Germany, China, run on IOUs. If everyone is in debt, who holds the other end of the receipt? Here's the twist most people miss. In a system built on promises, the world largely owes money to itself, but the benefits and the pain don't land evenly. Tonight, we are pulling the thread from royal wars to modern markets to see who actually gets paid when nations borrow, why governments rarely plan to finish the bill, and how confidence, not cash, keeps the whole thing breathing. What national debt really is and isn't. When you hear a country's debt, think of the central government's IOUs, not the debts of states, provinces, cities, or households. In the US Subway, for example, national debt means federal obligations only. It does not include what California owes, nor your student loans or mortgage. Governments borrow when spending outruns revenue, just like a household might. Except the lenders are not a single bank, but a lattice of investors, at home and abroad. Why not just print what's missing? Because unanchored money printing doesn't make a nation richer. It dilutes what's already there. Push it far enough, and you don't get prosperity. You get hyperinflation. Borrowing, by contrast, imposes a price, interest, that disciplines how much a government can get away with before investors balk. Debt, the architecture of the modern world. National debt is not a modern embarrassment. It's an old invention that changed history. In 1694, England, strapped for war against France, promised merchants steady interest funded by future taxes. To manage that bargain, it founded the Bank of England, and with it, the tradable government bond. That bond let the state spend before it collected and gave lenders an asset they could buy, sell, and hold. Paris copied the model. Amsterdam refined it. The fledgling United States used it to finance revolution and expansion. Debt didn't shrink empires, it enabled them. The battlefield moved from territory to the balance sheet. Centuries later, that scaffolding spans the planet. By recent tallies, global debt towers above $300 trillion, roughly 3 times world GDP. Every country borrows. Every bank holds someone's IOU. Every citizen, through taxes, pensions, and savings, is both debtor and creditor in the same machine. Why governments borrow, even when they could cut or tax? 1. To plug budget gaps. When tax revenue is $3 trillion and needs are $4 trillion, the missing trillion must come from somewhere. Cutting services is politically explosive. Raising taxes can be too. Borrowing is the pressure valve that keeps the lights on. 2. To invest in growth now, not later. Roads, ports, power grids, schools, hospitals. These are not line items. They're multipliers. Borrowing accelerates prosperity. Build the bridge today, collect the productivity tomorrow, and pay the interest from the growth it unlocked. 3. To fight crises. Wars, pandemics, natural disasters. When shock hits, the state must act fast. In 2020, the U.S. borrowed at historic scale to backstop households and firms. Without that cushion, the economy's landing could have been far uglier. 4. To refinance old promises. Governments continuously roll over debts, retiring old bonds with new ones. Done prudently, this is normal cash management. Done recklessly, it's a debt spiral. We've watched nations mishandle that rollover and crash. Sri Lanka's default is a recent painful example. 5. To steer the financial weather. Issuing and buying bonds helps manage interest rates and inflation, pull money out to cool price spikes, push money in to awaken a sleepy economy. Oversimplified? Yes, but the gist is right. Debt is a policy tool, not just a hole to fill. So, who lends to countries? A, their own people and institutions. Citizens, banks, insurers, mutual funds, pensions. Domestic buyers snap up sovereign bonds because they're usually safe and liquid. Even government trust funds, like U.S. Social Security, hold these bonds, creating intergovernmental debt, the government owing another arm of itself. In the U.S., that intergovernmental slice is huge, trillions, a reminder that a lot of we owe is we owe us. B, foreign investors and governments. Overseas banks, funds, and central banks buy liquid bonds from big, trusted issuers. Japan and China have long ranked among the largest foreign holders of U.S. treasuries, but their combined share is a minority of the total. When people say, we owe it all to China, the truth is narrower. It's a piece of a much bigger domestic and global mosaic. C, international lenders. For development, roads, power plants, water systems, countries tap the World Bank and regional development banks. For emergencies, currency runs, balance of payments shocks, they turn to the IMF, lender of last resort. Those loans are often cheaper, but come with conditions, raise taxes, cut subsidies, restructure industries that can feel like medicine with a razor in it. D, central banks, indirectly. When a central bank buys government bonds, often from commercial banks, it creates new money in exchange, shifting liabilities and assets across balance sheets. This is not the same as politicians writing checks from a printing press, but the line is thin. Central banks manufacture the safest collateral the system runs on. The circular mirror? We owe it to ourselves, mostly. Consider the U.S. curve of the vast federal debt. A substantial share is held by Americans, banks, funds, insurance pools, pensions, and the Federal Reserve. Foreigners hold the rest, but even there, the biggest chunks are trusted allies and global savers, not a single adversary. Taxes pay interest. That interest flows back into retirement accounts, money market funds, and bank capital. It's a closed loop within a broader global loop. Zoom out, and you see loops inside loops. Japan buys U.S. treasuries. The U.S. backs Europe through the IMF. Europe funds developing nations via the World Bank. Developing nations recycle foreign reserves into bonds from advanced economies. It's a planetary swap of promises, all priced by markets that reward stability and punish doubt. When the market judges, confidence, not charity. Behind every public budget is a private verdict. Bond markets, rating agencies, sovereign wealth funds, hedge funds, and pension giants decide, in aggregate, what a nation will pay to borrow tomorrow morning. If confidence cracks, yields spike, currencies tumble, governments fall. We've watched this movie. Greece in 2010, Argentina in cycle after cycle, Sri Lanka in 2022. When the bill comes due and cash runs thin, the invisible creditors become very visible. The IMF, the ECB, and the faceless bondholders whose spreadsheets move faster than politics. This is why countries obsess over credit ratings and debt to GDP ratios. There's no magic threshold, but investors want to believe the economy is large enough and growing enough to service the interest without starving schools and hospitals. Cross the line into panic, and rollover turns into sell-off. Is national debt good or bad? Ask instead, is it useful and manageable? Borrowing to invest in growth, or to cushion a once-in-a-century shock, can be profoundly stabilizing. Borrowing to paper over waste or buy time while fundamentals erode can be catastrophic. The danger isn't debt itself, it's unpayable trajectories. When interest crowds out essential services, debt stops being a tool and becomes a trap. Some countries add political pressure through a debt ceiling, a legal lid on borrowing. In theory, it forces discipline. In practice, it often becomes a recurring showdown that ends with the lid raised to avoid default. Markets read past the theater. What matters is whether the path of debt looks credible over time. The secret in plain sight. Governments don't plan to pay it off. Households aim to retire their mortgage. Nations don't. They plan to refinance forever, to roll old bonds into new ones. Servicing interest is the ongoing cost of stability. That's not a conspiracy, it's policy. Why? Because the world's financial plumbing depends on sovereign bonds as ultimate collateral. If a major government truly paid everything down, global markets would lose their safest asset, shrinking money like collateral and risking deflationary collapse. So states do the opposite. They keep the heart beating with regular issuance, calibrated to growth and inflation. The bonds in your retirement fund aren't viewed as a threat. They're seen as bedrock. Banks pledge them, central banks trade them, investors treat them as near cash. In this world, the goal is not zero debt, it's sustainable debt that markets continue to desire. Can a country be debt-free? Technically, yes. Realistically, almost none are, and for good reason. A debt-free state would either slash spending or jack taxes to the ceiling, squeezing growth and igniting political backlash. And without sovereign bonds, pensions and insurers would lose their safest parking spot, pushing savings into riskier assets and making crises wilder. A few jurisdictions with unusual revenue bases, think Macau, a small special administrative region, not a sovereign country, have flirted with near zero debt. But scaling that to large, complex economies is neither practical nor desirable. The fine print of "we owe it to ourselves." We owe it to ourselves doesn't mean everyone wins. Interest flows upward, from taxpayers to the owners of the bonds, banks, funds, and wealthy savers. Within nations and across them, debt channels resources from those who work and pay to those who own and lend. That's why inequality often rises alongside indebtedness. Creditors aren't RMT villains and debtors aren't T dupes. They are the two sides of a machine that allocates risk and reward. The tension begins when promises compound faster than the economy that must ultimately service them. How the loop actually feels. U.S. example. Take a simplified snapshot. The Treasury issues bonds to cover gaps or to refinance old ones. Domestic investors, banks, money market funds, pensions buy a big share. Foreign investors buy the rest. The central bank may buy bonds from banks, crediting them with new reserves, the system's high-octane money. Taxpayers service interest, Those payments flow back into retirement accounts, bank capital, and global savings pools. On paper, the U.S. owes foreigners an eye-catching sum. In practice, the largest creditor is the U.S. itself, its households and institutions. That's the mirror. Break the mirror, say, with a confidence shock. And yields spike, the currency stumbles, and politics scrambles to restore belief. Keep belief intact, and the loop hums. Sometimes too loudly, sometimes too quietly, but hums. Defaults, rescues, and the price of rescue. When belief cracks, the costs are human. In Greece, a decade ago, rescue packages arrived with austerity. Tax hikes, spending cuts, joblessness, and an exodus of youth. In Argentina, repeated restructurings turned debt into a national curse word. In Sri Lanka, fuel lines and political collapse followed when foreign currency ran out to service loans. Bailouts are not benevolent. They are bridges designed by creditors to protect the system and, ideally, help the country back to shore at a social price that citizens often deem unbearable. But after the fire, the pattern resumes. Old debts are reframed, new loans arrive, the spreadsheets reset. Because the system isn't built on perfect repayment, it's built on ongoing renewal. Why the system persists, and what could break it. This era's money is debt-shaped. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor is smudged by the fact that your retirement fund and your checking account sit on the same bonds your taxes help support. The machine persists because it works well enough for the people who run it, and because the alternative, ripping out the collateral keystone, would be worse. What could break it? Not mathematics alone. Confidence. If investors decide a nation-S growth story no longer justifies its rhythm of rollover, if politics tells a story that markets one IT finance, the interest bill balloons, refinancing turns to reckoning, and leaders face ugly choices. The safeguard is boring. Credible budgets, productive investment, sensible central banking, and an honest acceptance that debt is infrastructure, not a sin to purge, bringing it home. Who's actually owed? So, back to the paradox. If every country is in debt, who gets paid? The answer is a web. Domestic savers and institutions, banks, insurers, funds, pensions that hold their own government's bonds. Foreign investors, including allied governments, who prefer liquid, trusted collateral. International lenders, World Bank, IMF, whose loans come with policy strings. Central banks, which transform bonds into money-like assets inside the system. Add it up, and you see the pattern. Most sovereign debt is owed to citizens and institutions of the same country, or to global investors, participating in a circular market of promises. It's not a single villain. It's a framework, one that can lift nations when guided well and crush them when mismanaged. Final word. Debt is not a moral stain. It's the operating system. Used wisely, it brings tomorrow's prosperity into today's projects. Used badly, it mortgages the future for a handful of quiet years. The question that matters isn't how do we pay it all off? Because the plan was never to pay it all off. The real questions are, is our debt buying real capacity? Is our growth story believable? Are we keeping markets trust without breaking our people? Keep those answers on the right side of history, and the loop keeps beating, a heartbeat of interest and confidence through which modern life, for better or worse, continues. What to listen for in the headlines. When you hear record debt, don't just ask how much, ask who holds it, domestic versus foreign, pensions versus hedge funds. What's it buying? Consumption versus productive assets. What's the path? Rollover at low yields or scramble at punitive rates? Where's confidence? Ratings, spreads, currency trend. Those answers are the difference between a manageable subscription and an unpayable promise. And that's who the money is owed to. The dense, ever-shifting network of us, our banks, our funds, our retirements, and them, global investors and institutions, held together by a single fragile thing: belief.